All right, good morning. We're going to do a few different videos here on the reproductive system, chapter 28. So in this first video, what I really want to do is just talk through kind of the basic functions that are shared by both the male and female reproductive system, and then give us a quick review on how meiosis works, because that's going to be super important in gametogenesis, and I don't know if you remember that from Gen Bio. So functions of the reproductive system. So gametogenesis, that's going to be the formation of gametes. Now in the male, that gamete, of course, is sperm, and in a female, the gamete is an egg, or what officially we will call an ovum, right? The technical term for egg. So we'll look at those processes. They share some similarities, but also some very distinct differences. So when we get into the male reproductive tract, we'll get more detail on how gametogenesis works on males and vice versa in females. Fertilization then, of course, that's this picture over here. In fertilization, that's when the sperm is actually able to penetrate the ovum and deliver its DNA. And so we get this recombination of the DNA of two distinct individuals, the parents, and they are going to make a unique, genetically unique offspring. So of course, both male and female are involved there in fertilization. Now, development and nourishment of the fetus and the baby, that is only a role that the female reproductive tract takes on. And we'll look at that a little bit. It goes into more detail, some super cool detail actually in chapter 29 about how the female body is able to grow a new human, which is pretty phenomenal. So definitely, before you return your book, check out chapter 29. And then finally, we'll also look when we get into kind of both systems at the role that reproductive hormones play. So some of that should be a review from the endocrine system, but also now that it's in context, that might make some more sense. And particularly, I will say the female reproductive tract, the role of hormones is pretty complex and pretty phenomenal. So let's briefly review cell division, because again, some of us, Gen Bio has been a while. Now, there's two forms of cell division, mitosis and meiosis, right? So mitosis is cell division where the two daughter cells are going to be genetically identical to the parent cell. So a couple of reminders here on terminology. What I really like actually with this image that I brought in from a different book is that they show you what we call a homologous pair of chromosomes. So remember, you have 46 chromosomes, right? Humans have 46 chromosomes, but they're in 23 pairs. And so here they're showing like a light blue and a dark blue. You call it chromosome 3, right? You inherited one copy, say light blue here from mom, and one copy, the dark blue, from dad, right? So you have two copies of chromosome 3, right? It's a homologous pair. You are a diploid organism, right? You have two copies of each chromosome. Okay, chromosome 2, chromosome 1, right? The same thing happens. So I like that. They showed like an orange and a red, a gray and a black to show you this homologous pair. Now, in a cell, before it undergoes division, those chromosomes are going to duplicate, right? We actually do DNA replication. And so now instead of just being a chromosome that's like a single line, we have this very characteristic kind of X shape that we're used to seeing in our chromosomes. Now, this is the only part of this slide that's actually showing mitosis, right? And so what's happening here, notice that one, and now we talk about the two halves of this X as sister chromatids. Let me do this, right? So again, terminology you may have forgotten. These two are each sister chromatids, right? And these two are sister chromatids, right? Because each of those basically during DNA replication kind of doubled themselves. And then these two are considered homologous chromosomes, right? They're the same in that they're chromosome 3, but of course there's slightly different genetic material there since they came from different parents. Okay, so when we do mitosis, notice one copy of the gray here, one copy of the gray here, one copy of the blue here, one copy of the blue here. And so what's going to happen is you make two daughter cells, and they each have two copies of chromosome 3, two copies of chromosome 1, 2 copies of chromosome 2, right? They're still diploid. And if we could see all the chromosomes, they'd have 23 pair of chromosomes, right? We'd go right back to looking like this cell, which would be doing its cell thing. If it's a liver cell, it's being a liver. If it's pancreas, it's being a pancreas, right? And then before it divides, it would have to duplicate its chromosomes and then enter mitosis. So the thing to think about with mitosis is that in single-celled organisms, yes, this would be cellular reproduction, but in us, we're making these daughter cells, right, really to repair maybe old worn out cells, damaged cells. We make a lot of cells through mitosis during growth and development, right? You start out as a single fertilized cell, as a zygote, and you have to become 1 billion cells in like 9 months before you're born, right? So that's what mitosis is for. Hopefully this is sounding familiar. Hopefully you've already hit fast forward. You're like, yeah. Okay, meiosis then is how we are going to make gametes, right? How we are going to make sex cells. And the big thing, the key to making a good gamete is to cut the genetic material in half, right? To provide half the genetic material so that your partner can provide the other half of the genetic material, right? That's the whole point of doing sexual reproduction, right? And that is super useful because it gives organisms lots of diversity. Yeah, there's some species where they're like, forget sexual reproduction. I got the best DNA ever. I'm going to clone myself, right? You essentially do mitosis to get offspring. But that's not how humans, right? And that's not how most mammals work. So we're going to use meiosis. So again, what they're showing you here, right, is a normal cell. And then before it's going to be able to go through meiosis, we see that same kind of duplication taking place. Now, the thing to keep in mind is where this is happening. Because we're specifically trying to make gametes, this is either going to happen in the male gonad, which is the testis, or the female gonad, which is the ovary. So this is what's going to be happening in our stem cells. And we'll go through this again specifically in relation to spermatogenesis and oogenesis, right? But this is what's taking place in the stem cells that are developing, that are becoming sperm and ovum. Okay, so they're showing you that duplication, right? We go ahead and make an exact copy of DNA. We do DNA replication. And so in meiosis 1, and remember, to get a haploid cell, to get a cell that has half the genetic material, we're going to have to divide twice, right? We're going to split our genetic material in half and then split it in half again. And we'll look at how that works. But so here in meiosis 1, this is what we're starting out with, right? All of our duplicated chromosomes. Now, one of the really interesting things that happens in meiosis 1 is they form what's called a tetrad, or sometimes it's called a bivalent, where the homologous chromosomes actually glue themselves together. And this picture isn't like perfect because they're trying to show you, but they're like glued together, and they do something really unusual where they swap genetic material. Do you remember what that was called? Crossing over. I can't do that with my fingers, right? But like one chromosome, say our red one here, right, could break off a little chunk of DNA and swap it. I'm going to color this one in, right, and put a little bit of red there and move the orange over. And I'm kind of bummed they didn't like show that all the way through, but whatever. It does happen, and it's really, it adds to the diversity of offspring. Okay, so then notice in meiosis 1, what happens here is we split the homologous pair, right? So we had like light blue, dark blue. Light blue came this way, dark blue went this way. Light orange went this way, dark red went this way. Gray went this way, black went this way. Now, what's important to understand is it's not always like the mom's chromosomes go one way and dad's go the other. This is totally independent, right? So you might get chromosome 1, 3, 7, 15, 18, 22 from mom, right? And all the rest from dad going into your gametes. So it's totally possible, right, for your offspring to strongly resemble one parent or the other, but it's totally random. So it really is, you should end up with each gamete having 50% of its genes from your mom and 50% of genes from your dad. Anyway, okay. So then at this point, right, you can think of this well, I guess they show you over here. This is actually taking place in a cell. They just wanted to zoom in. Notice at this point, these cells are already haploid. They have half the genetic material, right? This cell only has one copy of chromosome 3, right? It's the light blue one. This one only has one copy of chromosome 2. It's the red one. That confuses people sometimes. Meiosis 1 results in 2 haploid cells, and we're going to divide again, right? And so in meiosis 2, we go through those same steps, but now we separate the sister chromatids, right? So one light blue chromosome here, one light blue chromosome there, and on and on. And so then the 4 daughter cells that end up, right, being formed from meiosis are each haploid, and they are genetically distinct, right? Each one of these actually ends up being unique. So even, like 3 and 4 here look similar, but again, if you think about crossing over, they're going to have a little bit slightly different genetic material, right? And this gamete then is the sex cell. So we will look at these processes in detail when we're in the systems, right? But spermatogenesis is going to be using meiosis to form sperm, right? This is the formation of the male gamete, which of course are these haploid spermatozoa down here. In oogenesis, and that is actually how you pronounce it, it's weird, you say both O's. Oogenesis, this is how we're making our mature ovum, right? Notice it is a haploid cell, it has half the genetic material. The one big difference I wanted to point out here in meiosis is that when we do meiosis 1, we actually want to keep most of the cellular contents in one side. We're trying to create this large ovum that's filled with sugars and nutrients and proteins and hormones and all these things. And so what we do is when we split the genetic material, half of it goes really with the oocyte and the other half kind of gets reabsorbed as what's called a polar body. That's just the genetic material, and it goes away. And then when we do meiosis 2, the same thing happens, right? We do nuclear division, we do mitosis, but we don't give this polar body any of the cell contents. They all stay over here in the ovum. So kind of an interesting difference. And then this is a picture out of your book showing meiosis, and they actually did a really a good job here, right? Pointing out some of that same language, chromatids, chromosomes, etc. And they also do a nice job of showing here in meiosis 1, the homologous pairs separating, right? We form 2 new cells. And then here in meiosis 2, we're going to separate those sister chromatids, and we end up with 4 haploid cells. So either way, works just fine. Okay, that was our quick review of meiosis and a little introduction to the reproductive system, and I'll be right back. We'll jump into the male reproductive system.